The wind never stopped talking on Caleb Hart's ranch. It whispered through the dry grass, rattled the loose boards of the barn, and pressed against the small house like it was asking why a man still lived there alone. And Caleb often wondered the same as he stood at the edge of his land watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Another day gone with no one to speak his name, no one to ask if he was tired, no one to sit at the table across from him, because since his parents were buried under that same red dirt and the neighbors moved away one by one, silence had become his closest companion, broken only by cattle lowing and the crack of firewood. And it was that silence that finally pushed him to the city office, where men talked about mail-order brides, like they were livestock, flipping papers, laughing, ranking women as good, pretty, or worth the money. And Caleb stood there awkwardly, hat in hand, listening to prices he could never afford, until a clerk slid a thin file across the desk and muttered, "This one's cheap. Nobody wants her." And when Caleb opened it, he didn't see beauty as the others defined it. He saw a pair of tired eyes in a faded photograph, eyes that looked like they'd learned how to survive without expecting kindness. And when he asked why she was unwanted, the clerk shrugged and said she talked too much about cooking and work instead of love, that she was small, plain, and poor, that her letter said, "I'm worth not much, sir, but I can cook." And something about those words struck Caleb harder than any polished smile ever could, because he knew what it meant to feel like you were worth not much, to offer the only thing you had and hope it was enough. And without fully understanding why, he paid what little savings he had, signed the papers, and waited, weeks stretching, like dry seasons, until the day a dusty stagecoach arrived carrying a woman wrapped in a thin coat far too light for ranch winters. She stepped down carefully, clutching a single worn bag, eyes scanning the empty land like she'd stepped into the end of the world. And when Caleb introduced himself, she bowed her head and spoke softly. "My name is Eliza. I will work hard. I don't complain." And he felt ashamed that she thought she needed to promise that, because the house she entered smelled of dust and loneliness. And she immediately began cleaning without being asked, scrubbing floors, washing clothes by hand, cooking meals that filled the house with warmth it had never known. And though Caleb tried to thank her, tried to talk, Eliza kept her distance, sleeping lightly, waking early, flinching at sudden sounds, as if expecting to be sent away at any moment. And at night, Caleb lay awake, listening to her quiet movements, wondering what kind of life taught someone that survival meant never resting. And one evening as she served stew, her hands shaking, she finally whispered the words that explained everything. "If you don't want me, I understand. I know I was not chosen first." And the pain in her voice cut deeper than loneliness ever had, because in that moment, Caleb realized she didn't believe she belonged anywhere. And though he wasn't a man of speeches, he looked at her across the table and said simply, "You're here because I wanted you." And Eliza froze like the world had stopped turning, as if no one had ever said that to her before. And the wind outside howled against the house, but inside, something fragile and dangerous began to grow, something neither of them knew how to name yet. Chapter 2. The seasons changed quietly after that night, snow covering the land like a fresh start neither of them dared to believe in, and Eliza slowly stopped apologizing for existing, though she still worked harder than necessary, cooking meals that tasted like care and memory, telling stories of her childhood while kneading dough, stories of hunger, of being passed from one household to another, always useful but never chosen. And Caleb listened without interrupting, because he understood that listening itself could be a kind of love. And when illness came in the form of a harsh winter fever that left Caleb shaking and helpless, it was Eliza who stayed by his bed, cooling his forehead, whispering prayers she learned as a girl, refusing to leave even when exhaustion bent her spine. And when he finally woke fully, he saw fear in her eyes, fear that if he died, she would disappear again into the world's cracks. And it was then he took her hand, rough and unsure, and promised she would never be sent away, that this ranch was her home. And Eliza cried silently, not loudly like stories say, but in small, shaking breaths like someone afraid tears might cost her everything. And as spring arrived, neighbors returned out of curiosity, whispering about the unwanted bride, watching her laugh softly while hanging laundry, seeing how the land itself seemed gentler with her there. And when one man joked crudely about her being cheap, Caleb stood taller than he ever had and said, "She's priceless," and Eliza heard him standing behind the door. And that was the moment she began to believe she wasn't a burden, but a blessing. And one evening, as the sun dipped low, Eliza confessed the truth she had carried like a secret wound, that she had written those words, "I'm worth not much," because experience taught her honesty was safer than hope, because hope had always been taken from her. And Caleb answered by placing his hand over hers and saying, "Worth isn't decided by who wants you. It's decided by who keeps you." And years passed not in dramatic leaps, but in shared breakfasts, repaired fences, quiet laughter, and love that grew not from passion alone, but from safety, respect, and choosing each other every single day. And when children came, the ranch echoed with voices instead of wind, and Eliza taught them to cook, to work, to believe they mattered. And sometimes she would pause, looking at Caleb with disbelief still, lingering in her eyes, and whisper, "You chose me," and he would always answer, "I still do." And this story, like so many untold ones, reminds us that the world often overlooks the most valuable souls, that those deemed unwanted often carry the deepest capacity for love. Years later, when the ranch stood fuller than it ever had, when fences were stronger, fields greener, and the house carried the smell of bread and laughter instead of dust, Eliza sometimes found herself standing alone at the stove, hands resting on the counter, remembering the girl who once believed she was worth not much. And it felt like remembering another lifetime, because the woman she had become was stitched together by quiet victories no one ever applauded. The kind of victories that happen in kitchens at dawn and sickbeds at midnight. And Caleb watched her then with a tenderness that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with gratitude, because love, he had learned, was not loud or demanding. It was steady like the land itself. And the true test of that love came the year drought struck harder than any season before, when the cattle thinned, the crops failed, and whispers spread again among neighbors that the Hart Ranch might finally fall. And fear crept back into Eliza's chest, old and familiar, because hardship had always meant abandonment in her past. And though Caleb never voiced it, she saw the worry in his eyes as he counted dwindling supplies late at night. And instead of shrinking, Eliza stepped forward, doing what she had always done best. She cooked for others, fed passing travelers, sold meals to nearby workers, turning their small kitchen into a place of warmth in a starving land. And people came not just for food, but for comfort, for the way she remembered names, the way she listened, the way she made them feel seen. And slowly, coin by coin, meal by meal, the ranch survived. And when the rains finally returned, neighbors gathered under the open sky, raising cups and voices, praising Eliza openly now, calling her the heart of the valley. And Eliza stood there stunned, tears in her eyes, because for the first time, praise didn't feel like a trick. And that night, long after the guests left, she confessed to Caleb that she used to believe love was something you earned by being useful, by cooking, cleaning, never asking for more. And Caleb answered with the truth he had learned through her, that love wasn't a reward or a transaction. It was a choice you made again and again, even when the world got hard. And as the years moved forward, grey threading into their hair, children growing into their own lives, Eliza taught other women who arrived broken and unsure, women who believed they were unwanted, showing them through action what dignity looked like. And Caleb watched her become the very thing she once prayed for, a place of safety. And when age finally slowed them, they would sit together on the porch at dusk, hands intertwined, listening to the wind that once sounded so lonely, but now felt like an old friend. And Eliza would smile softly and say, "I was wrong about my worth." And Caleb would squeeze her hand and reply, "We both were." Because this was never a story about a cheap bride or a lonely rancher. It was a story about how the world misjudges quiet souls, how kindness multiplies when given room to grow, and how sometimes the greatest love stories are built not from grand beginnings, but from two people who chose to stay when it mattered most. And if this final chapter moved you, if it reminded you that healing is real and love can grow from the smallest promises, then subscribe to this channel, because every story we share is proof that no one is truly unwanted. And the most powerful journeys often begin with words whispered in humility and end in a life filled with meaning.